The Chronicles of Prydain by Lloyd Alexander. Book 4, Taran Wanderer. Chapter 11, Dorith. After eating, the companions stretched themselves on the turf and slept solidly the rest of the day and all that night. In the morning, Doli took his leave from them. Ka, at Doli's request, had already begun flying to the fair folk realm with tidings that all was well. From there, the crow would rejoin Taran.
I'd go with you if I could, the dwarf said to Taran. The thought of an assistant pigkeeper blundering his way to the Lagradorn Mountains makes my hair stand on end. But I dare not. Idleg must have the jewel safely, and who's to bring it to him? Good old Doli.
It saddens me to part with you, Taran said. Oh, you've helped me more than I could hope. The Lake of Lunette bears the same name as the mere, and perhaps will lead me to it.
Farewell, then, said Doli. You've kept us all from being frogs or worse, and restored a treasure to us. You'll not regret it. We fair folk have long memories.
The dwarf clasped hands with the travelers and pulled his leather cap tighter on his head. Doli waved one last time, and Taran watched the dwarf's stumpy figure trudging steadily across a broad meadow, growing smaller in the distance until he vanished into the skirting woods, and Taran saw him no more. Through the day, the companions bore northward again. Taran would have been glad for Doli's guidance and keenly missed the gruff dwarf, but his spirits had never been higher. He rode eagerly, light-heartedly. The battle horn swinging from his shoulder gave him fresh courage and confidence. Hylanwe's gift is more precious even than I thought, he told Fluider. I am grateful to Doli for telling me its power, and more than that, for telling me of the Lake of Lunette. It's a strange thing, Fluider, Taran went on, how somehow I feel closer to the end of my quest. I believe more than ever that I'll find what I'm looking for.
Eh? How's that?
Fluider answered, blinking as if he had just come awake. Though Gurgi had put all thoughts of mortar behind him, the bard still seemed shaken by his ordeal and often lapsed into thoughtful silence when he would morosely finger his ears, as though expecting them to lengthen at any moment.
Dreadful experience, he muttered now. A flam into a rabbit! What were you saying? The quest? Yes, of course.
Smell with whiffings, interrupted Gurgi. Someone cooks tasty crunchings and munchings.
You're right,
Fluider agreed, sniffing the air.
Oh, blessed! There goes my nose, twitching again!
Taran reined Melendless to a walk. Lion, too, had caught the scent. Her ears forward, she looked hungrily at her whiskers.
Shall we see who it is? Asked Fluider. I wouldn't say no to a hot meal, so long as it isn't rabbit.
Taran nodded, and the companions rode cautiously through the glade. He had meant to catch a first glimpse of the strangers without himself being seen, but he had gone no more than a few paces when two roughly bearded men rose from the shadows of the bushes. Taran started. The two, evidently posted as guards, quickly drew their swords. One of the men whistled a bird call and stared sharply at the companions, but made no attempt to hinder them. In the clearing, Taran saw some dozen men sprawled around a cook fire, where collops of meat hung sizzling on a spit. Though heavily armed as warriors, the men wore neither the badge nor colors of any Cantrev lord. Some were chewing at their food, some sharpening their blades or waxing their bowstrings. Closer to the fire, stretched at his ease, a heavy-faced man leaned on one elbow and toyed with a long dagger, which he tossed and twirled, catching it first by the hilt, then by the point. He wore a horsehide jacket whose sleeves had been ripped out. His muddy boots were thick-soled and studded with iron nails. His yellowish hair fell below his shoulders. His cold blue eyes seemed to measure the three companions with an unhurried glance.
Welcome, your lordships, he drawled as Taran dismounted. What lucky wind blows you to the camp of Dorith?
I am no lord, replied Taran. I am Taran, assistant pigkeeper.
No lord?
Dorith interrupted in mock surprise, a half smile on his mouth.
If you hadn't told me, I'd never have guessed.
These are my comrades, Taran went on, vexed that he had let Dorith make sport of him. Gurgi, Fluid or Flam, he wanders as a bard of the harp, but in his own land he is a king.
And Dorith is king wherever he rides,
Another answered the yellow-haired man, laughing.
Now, Lord Swineherd, will you share humble fare?
With his dagger, he gestured toward the roasting caltrops.
Eat your fill. Dorith's company never goes short on commons. Then we'll want to know more about the three of you. The harper rides a strange steed, Dorith,
called a man with a badly scarred face.
I'll wager my American stand against the beast, no matter, for she's an evil-tempered brute and a killer born. Would it not be a merry match? What say you, Dorith? Will you have the cat show us some sport?
Hold your tongue, Gloff, Dorith answered, carefully eyeing Lion.
You're a fool and always were.
He pulled the meat from the spit and thrust it toward the companions. Fluider, having assured himself the roast was not rabbit, ate with a good will. Gurgi, as usual, needed no urging to finish his meal, and Taran was glad to swallow his own share, washed down with a mouthful of harsh-tasting wine Dorith poured from a leather flask. The sun was dropping quickly. One of the band flung more branches on the fire. Dorith stuck his dagger into the ground before him and looked up sharply at Taran.
And so, Lord, said Dorith, have you no traveler's tales to pass the time for my friends and me? Where do you come from, and where do you go, and why? The hill cantrevs are dangerous unless a man knows what he's about.
Taran did not answer immediately. Dorith's tone and the look of the men around the fire made Taran guard his words. We journey northward, through the Logradorn Mountains. Dorith grinned at him.
And where then? He asked. Or do you call my questions discourteous?
To the Lake of Lunette, Taran answered with some reluctance.
I've heard of treasure in those parts,
put in a man called Gloff.
Is that what they seek? Is it indeed? Dorith said to Taran. Treasure? He laughed loudly. Small wonder you're a miser with your words.
Taran shook his head. If I find what I seek, it will be more to me than gold.
So?
Dorith bent close to him.
But what would such a treasure be, Lord? Jewels? Fine-fashioned ornaments?
Neither, Taran answered. He hesitated, then said, I seek my parents. Dorith was quiet a moment. The grin did not leave his face, but when he spoke again, his voice was cold.
When Dorith asks a question, he wants a truthful answer, Lord Swineherd.
Taran flushed angrily. I have given you one. Say I have not, and you call me a liar. There was a sudden silence between the two. Dorith had half risen, his heavy face darkened. Taran's hand moved to the pommel of his sword, but in that instant a merry burst of music rose from Fluider's harp, and the bard called out,
Gently, friends! Hear a happy tune to settle our supper!
He leaned the beautifully curved harp against his shoulders, and as his fingers danced over the strings, the men around the fire clapped their hands and urged him on. Dorith settled back on the turf, but he glanced at the bard and spat into the fire.
You have done, Harper, Dorith said after a time. Your tune jangles from that crooked pot. We'll take our rest. You'll stay with us, and in the morning my company will guide you to the Lake of Lunette.
Taran glanced at Fluider and caught the bard's quick frown. He rose to his feet. We thank you for your courtesy, he said to Dorith, but time presses, and we mean to travel during the night.
Yes, so we do,
Fluider put in, while Gurgi vigorously agreed.
As for the lake, yes, well, we wouldn't think of putting you to the trouble. It's a long journey, far beyond your cantrev.
Prydain is my cantrev, Dorith answered. Have you not heard of Dorith's company? We serve any who pay us to serve. A weak lord who craves a strong war band, or 3 wayfarers who need protection against the dangers of their journey. The many dangers, Harper, he grimly added. Lunette is no more than a step and a jump from my men, and I know how the land lies. Will you go safely? I ask only a little part of the treasure you seek, a small reward to your humble servants.
We thank you, Taran said again. It is already past nightfall, and we must find our path.
How then?
Cried Dorith in a great show of indignation.
You scorn my poor hospitality? You wound my feelings, lords. Is it beneath you to sleep beside the likes of us? Swineherd, do not insult my men. They might take it amiss.
Indeed, as Dorith spoke, an ugly grumble rose from the band, and Taran saw some of the warriors finger their swords. He stood uncertain, though well aware of the bard's discomfort. Dorith watched him closely. Two of the men had drifted quietly to the horse lines, and Taran could imagine that in the shadows they were easing their weapons from their sheaths. So be it, Taran said, looking Dorith squarely between the eyes. We welcome your hospitality for the night, and tomorrow we take leave of you. Dorith grinned.
There will be time to speak of that again. Sleep well.
Sleep well?
Muttered Fluider as they wrapped themselves in their cloaks and uneasily stretched out on the ground.
Great villain! I'll not sleep a wink. I never liked the hill cantrevs, and this is one reason more for liking them less.
He glanced around him. Dorith had flung himself down near the fire, undoubtedly following his leader's orders. The man named Gloff had lay close by the companions.
I know of such roaming war bands,
Fluider went on in a hushed voice.
Ruffians and looters, all of them. The Cantrev lord who hires their swords to fight his neighbor soon finds them at his own throat. Dorith protects us from dangers. The worst danger is Dorath himself.
He's sure we're after treasure, Taran whispered. It's in his mind, and he'll not believe otherwise. Lucky it is, in a way, he added ruefully. As long as he thinks we can lead him to gold or jewels, he won't kill us out of hand.
Perhaps so, perhaps not,
answered Fluider.
He may not cut our throats, but he might just well decide to, shall we say, persuade us to tell him where the treasure is. And I fear he'd do considerably more than tweak our toes.
I'm not sure, Taran replied. If he meant to torture us, I think he'd have tried before this. He's put us in a tight corner, and we dare not let him travel with us. Still, I don't believe Dorith is all that sure of himself. We're only 3 against a dozen, but don't forget Lion. If it comes to a fight, Dorith has an excellent chance of killing us all. Yet I think he's shrewd enough to see it would cost him too dearly, perhaps most of his band and himself as well. I doubt he'll risk it unless he has to.
I hope you're right,
sighed the bard.
I'd rather not stay to find out. I'd sooner spend the night in a nest of serpents. We must get free of these villains. But how?
Taran frowned and bit his lip. Lonway's horn, he began.
Yes,
whispered Gurgi.
Oh, yes, magic horn of Tudins and Hoodins. Help comes with rescuings. Sound it, wise master.
Lonway's horn, Taran said slowly. Yes, that was first in my thoughts. Must I use it now? It's a precious gift, too precious to waste. If all else fails, he shook his head. Before I sound it, let us try with our own strength. Sleep now, he urged. Rest as much as you can. Before first light, Gurgi can go silently to the horse lines and cut the tethers of all Dorith's steeds, while Fluider and I try to stun the guards. Frighten them out, scatter them in all directions, then...
We ride for dear life,
put in Fluider. He nodded.
Good, it's our best chance. Without blowing that horn of yours, I dare say it's our only chance. Dorith,
he added, cradling his harp fondly in his arms.
My tunes jangle indeed. My harp a crooked pot. That ruffian has neither ears nor eyes. A flam is forbearing, but when he insults my harp, Dorith goes too far. Though alas,
Fluider admitted,
I've heard the same opinion from a few others.
While Gurgi and Fluider drowsed fitfully, Taran stayed wakeful and uneasy. The campfire burned to embers. He heard the heavy breathing of Dorith's men. Gloff sprawled motionless, snoring atrociously. For a little time, Taran closed his eyes. Had he chosen wrongly by not sounding the battle horn? He knew painfully that 3 lives hung in the balance. Doli had warned him not to squander the gift. But was the gamble too great?
Should the gift be spent now when its need was clearest? These thoughts pressed upon him heavier than the moonless night. As the black sky began to show the first pale traces of gray, Taran silently roused Gurgi and the bard. Cautiously, they made their way to the tethered steeds. Taran's heart leaped with hope. The two guards were sleeping soundly, their swords across their knees. He turned, meaning to help Gurgi cut the lines. The dark bole of an oak tree loomed, and he clung to the safety of its shadow. A booted leg thrust out to bar Taran's way. Dorith was leaning against the tree, a dagger in his hand.